All right, so we've taught you how to start these leadership prayer groups and then how you can then take that for mobilizing prayer campus-wide. I hope you came up with some great ideas because, again, this is a timeline and we've seen through our experience that this is the way it starts. You have a leadership prayer group, you move from the leadership prayer group to starting prayer mobilization efforts on your campus. And so one of the next things that we want to share with you is what would be next in the timeline, which we call information gathering and strategizing, or some might call it spiritual mapping. Spiritual mapping is kind of a weird term. We'll just kind of define it here for you in the box. But it's ministry leaders from multiple ministries mobilizing their ministries to collect accurate scientific and spiritual information about what the Lord and the enemy are doing on campus for the purpose of motivating specific prayer and strategic action. Spiritual mapping is just the process of trying to understand what God's doing, what the enemy's doing on the campus. And it can be done through simple conversations. Conversations is part of spiritual mapping, discerning what's happening. It can be done through prayer. As you pray together, you seek God and you try to discern what's happening. It can be done through video interviews where you're interviewing people on campus and asking them what they think about certain topics. That's spiritual mapping. It can be done by doing surveys, passing them out randomly on campus. You could do a survey at the end of the year for all the different campus ministries where they fill something out that can give you a bigger picture for what is really happening on campus. You could even in the Christian community do like an anonymous Christian survey that through that survey tells you some of the things that the Christian community is really struggling with and what the real areas of weakness and strength are in the Christian community on your campus. All of these things and many more that you could come up with are what we call spiritual mapping. It's trying to discern what God is doing on your campus. Now, if you're going to go in the foreign mission field, you would always do spiritual mapping. So this is what you do. If you're going to India and you've got some tribe or people that you're trying to reach, groups would go before you go there. Maybe you would be one that goes and you do your research. You get the lay of the land. If you're planting a church, even in the United States, teams will go and try to understand the community that you're going to plant the church. What are their interests? What are the things that God's doing in the community? What are the real strongholds of the area that would need to be addressed? What are the things that people are open to spiritually, and how we design our services to reach this type of people? We do all of this as spiritual mapping. And in a campus reaching effort, what you're trying to do is figure out what are the whole needs, both the obstacles and the opportunities to the gospel throughout the whole community, and even in the community of faith. And so that's spiritual mapping. Let me give you a couple things in your notes here as to why it's important, and then I'll share with you maybe some of the things that we've been doing at the University of Texas that might give you some ideas as well. First is because it serves as a guide for prayer, and this is probably the most important thing. Your spiritual map, and you'll see when we do the timeline here, and you go from leadership prayer groups to prayer mobilization to spiritual mapping, now you start getting arrows going up the back way because what you learn through your spiritual mapping is directly filtered back into the prayer movement, into your leadership prayer groups and your prayer mobilization, because what you learn you need to begin to pray into, both praying into what God's doing and praying into what the enemy's doing, that you would be able to, that God would move and abolish strongholds or break down the areas of campus that remain unreached. Secondly, it serves to guide strategy. As you get a more complete spiritual map of your campus, you're going to be able to discern what you're supposed to do. We did some surveys on campus at UT that revealed that there was a deep problem with eating disorders and with pornography. Not a surprise for most college campuses, but it's great to do these studies and to have hard facts of what we've learned. And so as an event through the campus reaching effort, we brought in this guy to do this whole thing called The Power of Porn, where a guy and a gal came and shared about eating disorders and the effects of pornography on their lives. It was a powerful event, one of the most well-attended things we've ever done on our campus. But it was because of our spiritual mapping that motivated us to do something, which also keeps you from doing just random events for events' sake. Your events then become more strategic and purposeful. Third, the process itself builds unity. And doing spiritual mapping together, you can build unity because the process of doing it, writing the questions, thinking about what you want to know, actually going out and conducting the types of surveys or whatever you might be doing, all the process builds into the unity. It gives you a tangible way to work together. And fourth, it serves as a resource for every ministry and blesses them. Just today, I had someone walk into my office and say, "Hey, don't you create something that helps us really understand what's going on campus?" And I said, "Yeah, I do. I'd be glad to give you one." And right away, I've got this guy, it's a brand new minister here, excited about being a part of what we're doing because I've blessed him. So as your campus reaching effort grows, a spiritual map is something really significant to get ministries involved, a real hands-on way that you can give something helpful to another ministry and win favor immediately. Here's what I want you to do. This will be a time for you guys to pause the video. So you'll pause the video, and this would be great. I don't know if you have a board where you are, but somehow somebody write down all these things that you would come up with. What are the things on your campus that you wish that you could know? So make a list of all the things that you wish you knew about your campus, both spiritually, educationally, economically, demographically, anything on your campus that you don't know that you wish that you knew. So get at that and make as big a list as you can. Dream big. Think of things that it would take years and years to find out or dive. What history even. So make your big list of what things you would like to know, and we'll come back in a minute. Well, I hope you came up with a really extensive list, because there's no limit to all the things that we need to learn about our campus to be better missionaries to it, right? To mobilize the body of Christ strategically, to focus all of its resources and reach the whole campus, we need a complete picture of what God's doing and what the enemy's doing on campus. Now, generally speaking, as taken from the City Reaching effort, or City Reaching book, rather, you'll see on your page here that there's studies of what you might call the harvest force, meaning what's God doing, what's happening in the Christian community. There's the harvest field. What are people that are not Christians? What's going on in the rest of the campus, not within the Christian community? And then there's the whole study of history. What are like the prevailing social bondages? Where do they come from? Why was your university founded? All those type of things. And so harvest force, we can just mention a couple things there. Actually, let me go to these scriptures here. What the word says. Numbers 13 is the passage you remember when Moses sent out the spies. They were supposed to spy out the land. It's interesting to know that God didn't just say, even though he promised them this promised land, you guys just go for it and I'll take care of it. But he was actually strategic, and he wanted them to send out spies so they could know where to go and where to attack and what would be the routes to take. We know, of course, the sad story that most of the men come back and are too afraid to go forward. But sending out the spies is an example. So Numbers 13, spies looking for specific information. Then there's Nehemiah 1 and 2, asking questions and prayer walking. Asking questions and prayer walking. In Nehemiah, you remember, and we'll look at Nehemiah a little bit later actually, he has a heart for what's going on in Jerusalem because he's heard that the walls had been broken down. And his heart, the vision that God gave him, was to see the Jewish community rally and serve God again and work to build this wall that they could have better protection and once again restore some of the things within Israel. And so what he first does is, because Nehemiah serves in the court of the king, some of his friends who actually could travel out of the king's court had been going and checking up on what was going on. And so when they come back, they report what they had seen and what was the state of this wall that Nehemiah had a vision to rebuild. See, that's just asking questions. Asking questions is part of spiritual mapping. But then when Nehemiah gets permission in chapter 2 to actually go and survey the land and start rebuilding the wall, he takes men with him. In the middle of the night, it says he gets on probably a donkey and rides this donkey around the wall just to assess the situation. I really believe, and you'll see in Nehemiah that he prays all the time, that this was his prayer walk, or I guess it was a prayer ride in his case. As he rides around the wall, he's assessing the situation and praying, and even then is determining, what is the strategy? What would God have me do? Now, truth be told, that the spiritual mapping that we're totally talking about, there's not a scriptural basis that's going to tell you you should do spiritual mapping, as there is regarding unity, regarding prayer, regarding campus saturation that we'll talk about. All those things have really hardcore biblical, basis for them. While the spiritual mapping, to me, it just makes sense. If we're to be wise in the way that we're to be toward outsiders, as Scripture says, if we're trying to become all things to all men, as Paul would say in his evangelism, we've got to know our cultures, we've got to know the people, we've got to know and discern. And even Paul said himself, we're not unaware of the devil's schemes. And so we need to become aware of what's taking place on campus, that we can speak and pray into it and act according to it. And so that's why it's biblical to do it. Let me give you some how-tos on spiritual mapping and tell you a little bit about what we've done at UT. Something with the harvest force. What can you do to find out more about the Christian community? What would be great is as you begin to convene the whole body in these leadership prayer groups, and you find representatives, even if you can build a good relationship with someone who maybe doesn't come to prayer on your weekly basis or something like that, but that you have enough relationship with the trust, you could probably do what we've done for the last several years, which is to do a year-end campus ministry survey. And it could be something that could be 2 questions or 10 questions or 30 questions. But if you can really get every ministry to do it and then pool all that information. Remember when we asked earlier, how many Christians are there on your campus? You'd know the answer, right? Those are things that you can know. You might ask the question, what parts of campus are you reaching? Where has God given you favor? And so someone lists, a couple fraternities and sororities. A couple says the engineering school and business school. A couple says we're doing some really good things in this dorm and this apartment complex. Then you get to begin to get a better picture of what really is happening on your campus. That could be done as a campus ministry survey, something you do at the end of the year. Another thing you could do in the Christian community that we've done at UT is your universities probably have where you can purchase or even go through a professor or some means to purchase scantrons. And we have actually done these 50 question scantrons where we distribute them to a number of Christians within the ministries, 400 or 500. And then they fill out these surveys, and now we can with great accuracy tell you things from where Christians live to how much time they spend reading their Bible to how often they fasted, or do they talk to their friends who don't know the Lord? Do they even have any friends who aren't Christians? How often do they spend time with them? How often do they look at pornography? How many have gone through counseling at some point in their life? To what is their parents' marriage like? All those things. The great part about both of these strategies, Campus Ministry Survey and the Christian Student Survey, is that you can write the questions as a team. And it builds unity in the process. So if you get a bunch of leaders together and say, what is it we'd like to know if we were to make our own survey? You guys write the questions in relationship with one another. And then there's also a higher motivation to fulfill it, or to fill it out, to complete it, because people have been a part of the process. Second thing is the harvest field. What could you do to understand more about what's taking place on the campus among those who don't know Christ? Many have done video projects. We've done video projects. My friend Kim and I, we went around campus last year and we took videos of students just asking them questions. One of the ones, for instance, we did last year was, what has been your experience when you've met Christians at the University of Texas? What's been your experience with them? And we got a lot of great answers. And have you had any friends that are Christians? And what's been your experience with them? We also asked in another survey that we did, do you go to church, yes or no? If not, why not? And what type of spiritual community would you be open to? Imagine if you had videos of all these things that you could present to the ministry leaders. That's part of spiritual mapping. You could also just do simple surveys. You know how it is on a college campus. People are everywhere asking little surveys and questions, and you don't want to do it in a bait and switch where you're trying to ask people a couple questions so that you can ultimately, share a booklet with them or something. But just go out and ask people a couple questions and get in conversations. At UT several years ago, we did 800 surveys, and we intentionally picked parts of campus that were different. I did mine in the Malcolm X Lounge, which is kind of an African-American hangout, JP's Java, which is kind of a grad student coffee house for smart people, and Posse Eats, which was kind of a beer joint. And so very, very different answers from those 3 types of people. And we did all these surveys and created them and put them in a file so that ministers can say, if I'm trying to reach people in Jester, I can see what people that live in Jester think. I can pull up, Latino and see what all Latino students said. I could pull up, 25 years old, or I could pull up women, or whatever it would be, and find out what people thought to these questions. Another thing you can do is you can go online. When it comes to demographical stuff, most of your campuses, probably even by law, have to report so much about their university. UT has a 250-page statistical handbook they make every year. And 90% of it is just too much information. But there's 10-20% of it that's just great. I can tell you, how many international students there are here at UT and where all of them are from. We can tell you, what the GPA is and what the people's study habits are like. And there's also the possibility that some of your classes, your sociology classes and such, actually have conducted surveys themselves on campus that you could actually just borrow their information. And so work with the resources that you already have on your campus and take things from them as well. Finally, you can also do that with the history. History can be discovered by lots of conversations, by interviewing past ministers, by interviewing people who've been in the campus ministry or church for a long time. Most of our colleges probably actually had Bible schools back in the day. If you can find the people who taught the Bible portions of the university back in those days. Digging up old newspapers. You guys know how to do study of history, but all of that can help reveal what are the long-term patterns and the kind of the footholds that the enemy has. Let me just give you the final thoughts here on these key principles. Key principles as you start spiritual mapping someday soon is 100% participation is needed for some things. If you're going to do the campus ministry survey, for instance, you really need almost 100%. You have to get everyone to do it. So you don't want to make something too big that half the people aren't going to do. But if you have a relationship with enough people and say, hey, can you just fill out this 10-question survey for me? Something like that, you might need 100%. So be aware that some things, you need that. Don't try to do it too early in the campus reaching process. If we were to write this again, honestly, we'd probably change that a little bit. We'd probably say don't try to do too much too early, because there's some types of spiritual mapping that you can do from day one. Just get started. But if you try to do too much too early before there's a relationship, that's why we're describing this whole thing as a process. As you get the leadership prayer group going and you get the prayer mobilization going, you're more likely going to be in a position to do this. Have other ministry leaders co-write the surveys. As I said, part of the process of unity is actually working on this together. Don't just come up with your own ideas. How much better to get leaders to submit what they think are the things that they would want to know. How much greater motivation would they have then to use it and to get their students or ministries or whoever to fill it out. Fourth, use ministries and leaders in what they're already doing to add to the map. For instance, there's some groups on your campus that already do surveys. At the start of the year, they've probably got groups on your campus that do 100 surveys already. So what if you could pool those campuses that do it and just say, could you use this survey as a part of what you're doing instead? So the ministries that already do certain things like this, just maximize what they do and make it more intentional and a unified effort. It must be well organized, presentable, and readable. Presentable and readable. Meaning, if you do come up with something, whether a PowerPoint or a printed document or whatever, make sure it makes sense so people know what they're reading. Similarly, the next one there, it must be accurate. It has to be the right information. You don't want to be accused of or even make the mistake of doing something that's not accurate. So whatever you do it well, get the right information, and report on it. Don't make the mistake of doing one poorly, then no one will want the next one. And so do it well, and that means probably starting simple and building onto it year by year by year. So that's spiritual mapping. I hope it has given you a greater vision for what you can do, and it's a real practical way to actually serve the ministries and get them involved so they can be more specific in their prayers, more strategic in their actions. And you'll find that when we get to the next step of strategic planning and implementation, it's the map that really helps give direction to where you're going to go beyond just mobilizing prayer and leadership prayer groups. The map is the next step to moving you toward action.